So, to frame the discussion a bit, many of you are familiar and or part of the Intentional Endowment Network's Net Zero Steering Committee and Net Zero Initiative, which really sought to and still seeks to guide endowments and provide a lot of resources to help endowments, foundations, investors invest for net zero within their portfolios. And as part of that initiative, we created a subcommittee to try and understand what does climate justice look like when we're talking about net zero. Because here you have an opportunity to create the roadmap for how folks will think about net zero for many years. And oftentimes when you have these conversations, the diversity comment or the racial equity comment is something that's kind of tagged on at the end. And so we wanted to view it from the beginning.
To get to net zero, we obviously have to get off the use of fossil fuels pretty quick. And the rough figures are that we have to cut emissions by 50% within 10 years to avoid 1.5 degrees of warming of our pre-industrial levels. That's a huge shift, huge shift. We've got about $30 trillion worth of fixed infrastructure, gas-fired, or gas-fired power stations, coal-fired power stations, all that structure. And dismantling that is no mean task. It's what we replace it with that we need to be thinking about. And what I'm conscious of is the benefits to communities.
How does net zero and just transition, or net zero and climate justice, how do those things relate? I want to give you just some really practical. For me, putting the people, the workers, and the communities at the center of that conversation is not just the right thing to do, it's the only way we're going to make progress. As many of my colleagues have said, you know, climate justice was built into the Paris Agreement, and if we don't address the workers and the communities, there will be no transition. We can't do it without the people who are involved.
One thing is undeniable: the banks are inextricably tied to the transition as the true allocators of capital in the global economy. When I engage with banks on what their role should be, what robust ESG strategy looks like, especially for those earlier on in their journey, I boil it down to 3 very simple pillars. The first is do more good, do less bad, and do both all the time. So with respect to the low carbon and just transition, doing more good, that means financing mitigation and adaptation technology, evidencing that your deployment of sustainable finance efforts makes meaningful progress against the clean trillion investment gap. It also means expanding access to the unbanked and the underbanked and promoting financial literacy and resilience.
Thank you all very much.